Right. So the industry dilemma. So Hackett called us do not wait. So what can we do? What are we doing about it as an industry? So a bit of background. Dame Hackett is a civil engineer. So when she looked at this as from a safety building thing of it, she looked at other industries. So she looked at other industries such as nuclear, oil and gas, and many of the concepts such as duty holders, safety case and golden thread all come from this information. I suppose a point of it is generally those industries are more regulated than the construction industry is at the moment. So when we start going into things like secondary legislation and how much can we really get involved with ourselves and how's it going, it's a point to be considerate of, really, I suppose. There's a bit about the kind of, if you don't get it right, there's the stick before we get into the carrot. Well, there's some criminal offences, there's some civil, private civil cases, and an extension of the Building Act of 1984, which obliges all local authorities to investigate and prosecute any non-compliant building work. So the idea is to early engagement, a safety regime that will actively get meaningful conversations with all levels of management about doing the right thing from day one. So whilst you're having conversations about scope buildings, you need to be looking at kind of like who other than the stakeholders need to be involved with, where that sign-off comes on there. Procurement decisions I'll talk on to a bit later on. Supply chain contracts management, and that's a bit about data and controlling data and the checks and balances. And then the IT, who's got the information and how's it being stored. So procurement. So I'm not going to talk about Gateway 1. So unless from a contractor's aspect, there's a new build, a land-led or a two-stage procurement. I think Gateway 2 is probably the most interesting aspect of the new regime. So we start about the lowest price and the race to the bottom and the price and quality procurement. So if quality is the driving force, how do you get quality? So this is from an alternative means. This could be from written submission, competency, level of standards. So back to that early engagement from management. As you start looking at jobs, I'd encourage everybody to engage with their procurement department on how can we assess qualities. If you look at the kind of type of work the fire remedial work does do, it's generally needed fairly quickly. So there is a tendency to go to an OJU compliant third-party framework and get a contractor onboarded really quickly. My question there is, how can you influence the quality you need of getting the right people if you go into an off-the-shelf procurement? So just as doing the investigation, just as you're getting sign-off for the work, just as you're developing that scope, you need to be engaging with the procurement people to kind of make sure you get the right product for when the project goes to site. Value engineering, it's been critical. So, ask a question to yourself is when have you talked about value engineering? You've generally talked about value engineering when you normally got a commercial problem on the job. So as an industry, we need to change the culture of what value engineering means. So if you ask an organisation, how do I save £500,000, then you're actually giving them the real drivers of the outcome. As clients and as consultants, we need to be putting more flexibility in the estimated build cost to what potentially might happen. If we start looking at value engineering as costly quality, and not something you just bring into when you've got a commercial problem and somebody higher up in the organisation saying is, I haven't got another £500,000, we need to be robustly setting that back. We are going to likely to see that value engineering move away because of some of the concepts of it's really a cost-cutting exercise. The other theme is the design and build aspects. We're likely to see that being slightly eroded, and there's two reasons for that. There's the kind of making sure you got the right products in what's being installed on site, but there's also, we're likely to see management contractor coming in from a client point of view, because this has two things. Not only can you specify the material, and there's a couple of things going on with the material specifications. So the MHCLG is going to give some guidance notes, some clear guidance on what materials are open to interpretation and what are not, and also the product safety and standards are likely to give some product of construction materials coming out there. So the material things will be more regulated. I think the second aspect of going away from D&B to management contractor is you're going to have a second tier of checks and balances on site. And hopefully when we go on to some of the checks and balances on site, you'll see what I mean by that. So you've got a project, it's being designed, it should be designed in there. So how do you get approval to commence on site? So this is really a kind of a bolt-on from any kind of, it's for the duty holder, the accountable person, and the building safety regulator to have that early dialogue. And things you're likely to see in that submission is things like the full plans. So that's an extension of the building regulations of 2010. You like to see the detailed specification on the fire and structural safety and how it will be managed. You're going to see perhaps some 3D modelling of the building and showing the construction materials going to be used. An update of the fire and emergency file. That's basically how you control the fire and the emergency planning whilst you're on site doing the work. And this is really a bolt-on from the fire statement from the Gateway 1. Document already mentioned is a construction control panel. This is a real this is a real important document because this really sets out the compliance with the building regulations, how it will be achieved and what's been controlled and recorded. And that recording, and we'll go on to it later on in Gateway 3, is how you record that change and making sure that is a live document. So if you look at some of the regulation inspection authorities, the regulator will have the authority to open up and test and basically condemn some non-compliant work. So this is about if you've got a cladding job and you're only taking a few panels off there, you're likely to see the regulator going, can I see some more inspections on here? So there's that additional power that's in there going, making sure if you don't ask questions now, I'm going to ask you to questions. So again, to the industry, we may as well start asking more questions at pre-commencement before we get to Gateway 2, and then that should satisfy exactly what the industry is looking for. We took on complex jobs, a potential for multiple gateways. So if you've got a longer period, you can have multiple gateways. You can crack on with some work on a Gateway 2 whilst you're still getting to a stage of a Gateway 2 on other phases. So as you've got a complex or a long-standing job, you might have a job with several gateways on here. Resident voice and engagement. That's something coming through, thick and thin through the golden thread, through Hackett. That's about the building safety manager's duties, recording and getting the information from the end users and feeding it back. However, I know Paul's going to speak of this later on, so I'm not going to kind of go too much onto this. So, third-party accreditation and competency. So I picked some topics, some real things going on at the moment. And just so hopefully we can start influencing the industry now and not wait another 18 months before we're kind of forced to do this. So fire doors, check specs and NDAs. So to be a fire door manufacturer, you need to be a member of the UCAS accredited scheme. So that means you've passed it originally and you've gone on and passed the inspections and the audits annually. So that basically gets to a certain level of standard of installation or manufacturing, depending if you're a manufacturing and installation organisation. So there's secondly other things that can be done here about the number of certified installers ratio on site. So what we can do as an industry, we can start demanding more quality by saying rather having 10% of the installations done by a qualified installer, can we move this up to 50%? I know Engie's been doing this for the last 2.5 years, and in the next 18 months, we're looking at moving this to 100%. So I'd encourage everybody in the industry to say, how can we affect quality now and how can we bring that standard up? If you look at some of the kind of anomalies with there, because of the NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, Hackett is about sharing that information and being transparent. And the NDAs on some of the kind of compliance stores, I think is a thing the issue needs to deal with, because it goes against what Hackett is saying basically. The other issue is you can be a UCAS accredited and be approved. You could fail an inspection, and due to GDPR, you could go onto another UCAS accredited system and then be approved again. So it's really down to what kind of control mechanisms have you got to inspect, and what can you do? So you could range the criteria of things like doing more inspections, more quality installers. You could ask the accredited body, and there's also experts out there that can come and give you guidance on what to look for as well, and even do some random checks. If you look at fire stopping, this is passive fire stopping, and this is data tagging. So before, during, and after a picture is taken of the word, it's recorded digitally, and there's many systems on for this. There's iAuditor, Bolster, UL, Hilti, Boris, and I know Simon later on is probably going to talk about some of the systems in here. So it's about data, keeping that digital file on there. It's on there showing that the building is compliant on there. Cladding, the A1s and 2s, products of the materials. So putting aside the Kingspan issue for a side at the moment. So the A1 and the A2 system is manufacturing. So you want to be asking, how is it procured? Is it procured as a installation and a supply, or is somebody breaking this up? Because as soon as you might have a product that is fitting the circumstances, but it might not have enough due diligence and new checks and balances on the installation. So back to that subcontractor control mechanism about how you keep that data, how you keep that recording, showing evidence is compliance, and that control. But as an industry, we all need to be asking those questions. So what can you do? We do as an industry, back to raising that quality. We can start thinking about, well, A1s and A2 materials only. I know other clients are looking at doing this on 11 stories and above, on the premise that they're likely to bring that height down in the kind of secondary legislation. So if you look at regulation, and this is something that the industry has kind of had a go at doing themselves, I think it's gone reasonably well. I still think there's areas that need to improve on it, and the question is, will the industry be able to push that forward without any kind of secondary legislation or intervention? So you've done the work, you've kind of hopefully got everything signed off. Now you get to the phase that you're going to be handing the job over, the completed job, the occupation phase, from the in-phase construction into the accountable person and the building safety manager. How to manage it, how maintains it, and who's responsible for, and what they need to do. So, as we said, there's likely to be from an Act point of view, there's likely to be a phased plan of when new build and occupied properties come into place, and that's to do with the building assurance certificate. So we're likely to see, when the Act come into place, new builds are probably going to go forward before occupied buildings. So that way the building safety regulator will have that kind of breathing space to get that up to speed. So we mentioned before, what do we need to do? So first of all, we need that joint statement by the principal contractor and principal designer, that declaration of conformity. We'll be finalising the kind of building safety information pack, and all the stuff in Regulation 38 will probably come into there. We'll be completing the fire and emergency plan, what's happened on the site, how to control it when it's an occupation. The construction control plan, updated and recorded, not only from Gateway 2, but to really about what happened on site, because there will be changes on site as you go along there. You'll also be named the accountable person, the building safety manager, and that certificate will be there for everyone to see. So you need to early engagement on what happens on there. And I think what Lucy mentioned earlier is this will be a live document. Long gone are the days where you will do an old O&M manual in paper copy. It'll sit on somebody's shelf for 10 years and then get binned. This needs that the obligation of the building safety manager makes this a live document, and therefore it will be his or their obligation to make sure this is kept live, and kind of any issues is updated. That will just keep the kind of building safety regulator kind of updated when it goes to the annual review. So what kind of challenges do we think are needed in this? Well, upskilling the information knowledge. As we speak to clients and we try and kind of promote this wherever we can, there's lots of clients that are still at stage where developing their strategy on the bill, developing their information. We are 4 years since Grenfell, and it's going to be 5 years before this act comes into place. And we need to be having more conversations of internal sharing information on what this looks like. So I encourage all kind of organisations to kind of like make sure we start promoting internally what this likes to happen and start early engagement, because many of the things here we should be looking at now and we can be implementing it. A cross-sector approach. That's to do with, well, many organisations, we're all coming up with some good ideas. The industry's finding this way. My question is, do we need some guidance or at very least some kind of checklist of what needs to be done and when? Culture change. That's about positive culture change, and what organisations are preparing for this. You will have some organisations that are waiting for the legislation to come in. You'll have other organisations who are really being proactive on this. The least we should be doing is when we've got complex buildings and you've got a freeholder, a head lease, you've got commercial units. There's an anomaly that you might have multiple accountable persons in a building. So you need to kind of make sure those kind of relationships are kind of worked out now for any in-scope buildings. I think that's the kind of things we could be doing now as an industry to kind of make this, when it comes into effect, a little bit more easier. So what can we do now, I suppose? And the commercial challenges about, do we need a standard approach of assessing costs? And every business got to work out when to actually approach the incoming and recovering the costs. Because there's things like there's other things coming on the range of the commercial challenges, such as decent homes, the climate emergency, zero and carbon. These are all big challenges for the industry at the moment. The insurance companies, the kind of cross balance between the right to claim and getting on with it. The only thing I'd say on that is make sure you reserve your right to make a claim later on. The record keeping of the supply chain. When you look at quality documents, look at a second tier. What kind of supply chain are the organisations bringing? Are they engaging with the digital involvement?